Dear friends, we are so excited to share with you our insights on Russian literature. Let me explain our selection of works by Russian writers that we are going to discuss. We have chosen the pieces that are the best in terms of giving us a setting, giving us the atmosphere of old Russia, of some historical period, of some period of time that author wanted to share with us. There are many other beautiful pieces of Russian literature, but each one that we have carefully selected for this course would be an ability to submerge into a certain atmosphere of a certain period. So the first author we are going to talk about is Alexander Pushkin, and the first short story that we are going to discuss is called The Shot. Let me say a few words about the personality of Alexander Pushkin. I especially enjoy the portrait that you can see now on the slide. Here you can see that Pushkin somehow is not completely Russian, and it's interesting to know that his grandfather was named Ibrahim Hannibal, and he was from Ethiopia. On the other hand, you can see that on this specific picture, Pushkin is having a kind of a Scottish scarf around his neck, around his body, and this is of course a tribute to Byron, because many poets and writers of Russian literature in the 19th century were inspired by the image of this poet. Please have a very careful look at the dates of his life. You can see that he died at the very early age, at the age of 37. And the reason for his death was a duel for the honor of his wife. Pushkin was a very special child since his early years. And have a look at the picture of Pushkin as a child. He started to write verses, and some of his verses were in French at the very early age. He was married to a beautiful girl, a noble woman called Natalia Goncharova, but mind that at that time it was quite typical to speak French at court. So most commonly we call her not Natalia but Natalie Goncharova, because this was the way they used to call her at home. And Pushkin was mortally wounded in a duel for the honor of his wife and died a couple of days later. So for me, somehow the story that we are going to read now, The Shot, is connected with the fate of Pushkin. In fact, he participated in more than 30 duels, but all duels finished relatively well to him, except the last one. So the story is called The Shot, and here, have a look. This is a portrait of Pushkin, which was painted by himself. That's how he has seen himself. Now, one more important thing we need to tell before we start discussing the story is that Pushkin has created a narrator for these stories, and the narrator's name is Ivan Petrovich Belkin. Why is that so? In some of these stories, Pushkin is describing the period of time like 1812, 1811. At that time, he was a very young boy, aged 12 or 13. So a careful reader might ask, what do you personally remember from that period? And the narrator that he has made up, Ivan Petrovich Belkin, is much older than Pushkin himself. So he can tell the story of his life without contradicting himself. And these stories were first published as, have a look please at the slide, the stories that were told by Ivan Petrovich Belkin. But please make no mistake, because ultimately the author is Alexander Pushkin, and they were firstly published in 1831. Have a look at the opening lines of this story. We were stationed in the little town of N. The life of an officer in the army is well known. In the morning drill and the riding school, dinner with the colonel or at a Jewish restaurant. In the evening punch and cards. In N there was not one open house, not a single marriageable girl. We used to meet in each other's rooms where, except our uniforms, we never saw anything. Have a careful look at these lines. It is interesting how, from the first few words, we have the whole picture of the place. The city or the town is called N without giving a specific name, because that could be just any provincial town of Russia. And any officer that ever served there can perfectly well recognize the town that is described here. One more thing is that we have here a Jewish restaurant. Why specifically Jewish? Because in some small provincial towns, that was the only place you could go. There were no other restaurants at all. And a small Jewish restaurant was the only escape for the people, for the officers, from the routine of everyday life. The only place where you could try a nice food without going out of the town. This is one more feature of provincial town of Russia in the 19th century. And have a look at the next slide. We are immediately introduced to a very unusual character. We can call it a romantic character that has some mystery about him. One civilian only was admitted into our society. He was about 35 years of age, and therefore we looked upon him as an old fellow. His experience gave him great advantage over us, and his habitual taciturnity, stern disposition, and caustic tongue produced a deep impression upon our young minds. Some mystery surrounded his existence. He had the appearance of a Russian, although his name was a foreign one. He had formerly served in the Hussars, and with distinction. We are immediately introduced to the main character, to the protagonist of that short story, and his name is Silvio. He has an appearance of a Russian person, but nobody knows what his means are and what his aim is. And have a look at another word, the Hussars. This is a very special division in Russian chivalry that normally was very active in the battle, but also it was connected with a great risk to a soldier's life. So being a Hussar is a great honor to everyone who served there. The officer normally was a nobleman. And of course, we must remember here that the officers had a certain code of behavior. They couldn't leave an offense without reacting to it. And sometimes the honor of the officer was more important than his life. That is an important background for the plot of the story. Let's have a look at the next slide. The officer, heated with wine, play, and the laughter of his comrades, considered himself grossly insulted, and in his rage he seized a brass candlestick from the table and hurled it at Silvio, who barely succeeded in avoiding the missile. We were filled with consternation. Silvio rose, white with rage, and with gleaming eyes said, "My dear sir, have the goodness to withdraw, and thank God that this has happened in my house. Dear friends, we see here a row between two officers. It must have finished with a duel, one person killing another. We know that Silvio was a very good shooter, but in this specific case, he dismisses the offense and doesn't want to fight another officer who offended him. It's not a very good greeting, throwing a chandelier at someone's head, is it? So, why this person, who obviously is brave and who is a good shooter, doesn't challenge the offender for a duel? That is another mystery that the author is going to unveil for us. And Silvio is telling his story, and he is revealing for us the aim of his humble and lonely life. Are you ready to know it? I was calmly enjoying my reputation when a young man belonging to a wealthy and distinguished family, I will not mention his name, joined our regiment. I took a hatred to him. At last, at a ball given by a Polish landed proprietor, seeing him the object of the attention of all the ladies, and especially of the mistress of the house, with whom I was upon very good terms, I whispered some grossly insulting remark in his ear. He flamed up and gave me a slap in the face. We grasped our swords, the ladies fainted, we were separated, and that same night we set out to fight. We have a retrospection here. We come back in time, and Silvio tells us about another duel that he has nearly taken. And what has been very special about this duel, you can see on the next slide. So again, he is fighting a very young, a very rich, a very noble person, but technically he is just a boy, though he is a soldier, though he is an officer and a nobleman. The first number fell to him, the constant favorite of fortune. He took aim, and his bullet went through my cap. It was now my turn. His life, at last, was in my hands. I looked at him eagerly, endeavoring to detect if only the faintest shadow of uneasiness. But he stood in front of my pistol, picking out the ripest cherries from his cap and spitting out the stones which flew almost as far as my feet. His indifference annoyed me beyond measure. Have a look at this scene. Silvio is standing in front of a boy who is not afraid to die. Why? Is he as brave as that? No. He just doesn't know the value of life. So he is ready to give it away. Is there any point in killing a boy who doesn't yet even know the true value of life? Is it going to bring any kind of pleasure or fun to Silvio? It's pointless to take life from a person who doesn't yet know the worth of it. So guess what Silvio does? This is a very interesting solution of this problem. Have a look. What is the use, thought I, of depriving him of life when he attaches no value whatever to it? A malicious thought flashed through my mind. I lowered my pistol. You don't seem to be ready for death just as present. I said to him, you wish to have your breakfast? I do not wish to hinder you. You are not hindering me in the least, replied he. Have the goodness to fire, or just as you please, the shot remains yours. I shall always be ready at your service. I turned to seconds, informing them that I had no intention of firing that day, and with that the duel came to the end. I resigned my commission and retired to this little place. Since then, not a day has passed that I have not thought of revenge. And now My hour has arrived. Have a look. Silvio didn't want to take a life from a person who doesn't yet know what the life is. He leads with a revenge, but his revenge will only be sweet enough when a person recognizes and understands the value of life. Now his hour has come. Why? Can you pause now and try to guess what happened to the other person? What happened to a young boy now that has made him to understand the true value of life? Have you got the answer? Let's try and check that. Now we can see that the narration passes from Silvio, that the author is not going to see anymore, to the young boy. The young boy that was to be killed but was not. And he met Silvio after a few years. He is already a married man. He's got a family, and that's what he tells about himself and about Silvio. And they're meeting after a couple of years. 5 years ago I got married. The first month, the honeymoon, I spent here in this village. To this house I am indebted for the happiest moments of my life, as well as for one of its most painful recollections. One evening we went out together for a ride on horseback. My wife's horse became restive. She grew frightened, gave the reins to me, and returned home on foot. I rode on before. In the courtyard I saw a traveling carriage, and I was told that in my study sat waiting for me a man who would not give his name, but who merely said that he had business with me. Dear friends, you may guess that the man who didn't give his name is well known to us, and that is Silvio. Do you quite understand now? What did he come for? He is going to ask for his debt. And what is his debt? Do you remember the name of the story? The shot. He is going to ask for his shot now. You do not recognize me, Count, said he in a quivering voice. Silvio, I cried, and I confess that I felt as if my hair had suddenly stood on end. Exactly, continued he. There is a shot due to me, and I have come to discharge my pistol. Are you ready? And you can see that the Count now, that young boy, started to understand the value of life. He is happily married, and he enjoys his life thoroughly. This is the time for revenge. He is tied by the honor of a nobleman. He cannot beg for pardon. He can only give Silvio the shot. And that's what happens. Silvio, as he is also a very noble person, is telling the Count, as last time, you are shooting first. I fired, continued the Count, and, thank heaven, missed my aim. Then Silvio, at that moment he was really terrible. Silvio raised his hand to take aim at me. Suddenly the door opens. Masha rushes into the room and with a loud shriek throws herself upon my neck. Her presence restored to me all my courage. My dear, said I to her, don't you see that we are joking? How frightened you are! Go and drink a glass of water and then come back to us. I will introduce you to an old friend and comrade. So he says it's just joking. Maybe this is the last phrase that he says in his life. Don't you think so? Can you guess what happens next? Let's have a look. The wife asks Silvio, tell me, is my husband speaking the truth? Said she, turning to the terrible Silvio. Is it true that you are only joking? Have a look at the answer of Silvio. He is always joking, Countess, replied Silvio. Once he gave me a slap in the face in a joke. On another occasion, he sent a bullet through my cap in a joke. And just now, when he fired at me and missed me, it was all in a joke. And now I feel inclined for a joke. With these words, he raised his pistol to take aim at me. Right before her, Masha threw herself at his feet. "Rise, Masha! Are you not ashamed?" I cried in a rage. "And you, sir, will you cease to make fun of a poor woman? Will you fire or not?" Will he fire or not? This is very interesting. Have a look at that. "I will not," replied Silvia. "I am satisfied. I have seen your confusion, your alarm. I forced you to fire at me. That is sufficient. You will remember me. I leave you to your conscience." Then he turned to go, but pausing in the doorway and looking at the picture that my shot has passed through, he fired at it almost without taking aim and disappeared. Look at this last scene. It shows that Silvio was a very sharp shooter. Without taking aim, he shoots exactly the place which was shot by the bullet of the Count. And then he leaves. Everyone is completely sure that if he just wanted it, he could have killed the Count in a matter of seconds, but he did not. Why? He enjoyed the taste of revenge, and that was enough for him. Did you expect this ending? Did you expect Silvio to behave in such a way? But do you agree that this taste, the sweet, the bittersweet taste of revenge, is described here so precisely that you can almost feel the taste of it? This is a very short story, but the meanings are so compressed here that by reading it, you feel like you have completed the whole book, if not the whole life. Dear friends, thank you very much for your attention, and we want to see you again with us.